The clock on the wall read 6:52 p.m. when Sarah placed the last plate of spaghetti on the dining table. The day had been long, and she was looking forward to finally sitting down with her 12-year-old son, Ryan, for a quiet meal. Life as a single mom wasn't easy, but Sarah took pride in making moments like these count, small rituals of normalcy in a hectic world. "Ryan, dinner's ready," she called out, wiping her hands on a dish towel. From the living room, she heard a muffled response, but no footsteps followed. Typical, she thought with a smile. Her son was probably too engrossed in his video games to notice the delicious aroma of the bolognese sauce wafting through the house. "Ryan, I'm not going to call you again," she yelled, more sternly this time. "Coming," he finally shouted back, though it was another few minutes before he shuffled into the dining room. Ryan dropped into his chair with a casual indifference only a preteen could muster, his lanky frame seeming too big for his age. He dug into his plate, twirling spaghetti around his fork while Sarah watched him amused. "How was school today?" she asked, trying to spark some conversation. "Fine," he mumbled through a mouthful of food, avoiding her gaze. Sarah chuckled, shaking her head. "Fine, huh? Nothing exciting?" "Nothing terrible." Ryan shrugged, still focused on his plate. "Just fine." Sarah let the conversation drop, knowing that prying too much usually backfired. She was content to sit in silence, enjoying the rare moment of peace. But the calm didn't last long. Midway through his second helping, Ryan froze. His fork clattered to his plate as he doubled over, clutching his stomach. "Ryan." Sarah's voice was sharp with concern. "What's wrong?" "I don't know," he groaned, his face scrunching in pain. "My stomach. It hurts really bad." At first, Sarah thought it might be something simple, indigestion or gas. "Maybe you ate too fast," she suggested, her heart beginning to race despite her efforts to stay calm. "Try drinking some water." Ryan shook his head, his breathing shallow. "It's not that, Mom. It's really bad. It's like stabbing." Sarah stood, her chair scraping against the tile floor. "Where does it hurt?" "Show me." He gestured weakly to his lower right side. Her stomach sank. She wasn't a doctor, but she knew enough to recognize the symptoms of appendicitis. "Ryan, we need to go to the hospital," she said, grabbing her keys from the counter. "No, I can't," he cried, tears streaming down his face. "It hurts too much to move." "You don't have a choice," Sarah said firmly, helping him to his feet. "Come on, honey. Lean on me." The drive to the hospital was a blur. Ryan sat in the back seat, doubled over, his face pale and glistening with sweat. "Hurry up, Mom," he cried out, his voice breaking. "I can't take it anymore." "I'm going as fast as I can, sweetheart," Sarah said, her voice trembling. She glanced at him through the rearview mirror, her heart breaking at the sight of his pain. The emergency room came into view just as Ryan let out another agonized groan. Sarah parked haphazardly in the drop-off zone, ignoring the annoyed honks of other drivers, and ran to his side. Inside, the ER was its usual chaotic self, with nurses and doctors rushing between patients. Sarah approached the reception desk, half carrying Ryan. "My son's in severe pain," she said urgently. "I think it's his appendix." The nurse on duty took one look at Ryan and nodded. "Let's get him to triage right away." Ryan whimpered as they helped him onto a hospital bed, his face contorted in pain. Sarah stayed by his side, gripping his hand tightly. "Mom," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Am I going to be okay?" Sarah's throat tightened. She forced a smile, smoothing his sweat-dampened hair away from his forehead. "Of course you are, baby. They'll fix you up in no time." The next hour was a whirlwind of activity. Doctors asked questions, nurses took vitals, and tests were ordered. Sarah answered everything as best she could, her mind racing. Ryan's pain seemed to grow worse with every passing minute, and the sight of him in such agony was almost unbearable. Finally, the attending physician confirmed what Sarah had feared. "It's acute appendicitis," he said, his tone calm but urgent. "We need to operate immediately." Sarah nodded, her chest tight with anxiety. "Do whatever you have to do," she said, looking at Ryan. They prepped him for surgery quickly, and Sarah kissed his forehead before he was wheeled away. "I'll be right here when you wake up," she promised, her voice breaking. Sitting alone in the waiting room, Sarah felt the weight of the day crashing down on her. The sterile walls and fluorescent lights seemed to close in around her as she replayed the events in her mind. Had there been signs she'd missed? Could she have gotten him here faster? The guilt was overwhelming, even though she knew she'd done everything she could. After what felt like an eternity, the surgeon emerged. "The surgery went perfectly," he said with a reassuring smile. "We removed the appendix just in time. He's going to be fine." Relief washed over Sarah, and she felt tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. When she was finally allowed into the recovery room, she found Ryan lying in the hospital bed, pale but awake. His eyes fluttered open when he heard her approach. "Hey, champ," she said softly, sitting beside him. "Hey, Mom," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "You made it in time." Sarah laughed through her tears, brushing his hair back. "Of course I did. You scared me, you know that." "Sorry," he murmured, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Don't you ever do that again," she said, her tone teasing but firm. "I don't think my heart can take it." Ryan chuckled weakly, and Sarah felt a surge of gratitude. He was going to be okay. The next few days were a mix of rest and recovery, with Sarah staying by Ryan's side every step of the way. As he regained his strength, his usual humor and energy began to return, and Sarah knew they'd made it through the worst. Looking back, the experience was a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the depth of a parent's love. No matter how scared or helpless she felt, Sarah knew she would always do whatever it took to protect her son. As they left the hospital, Ryan leaned on her for support, his steps slow but steady. "Thanks for hurrying, Mom," he said, his voice soft but sincere. Sarah smiled, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. "Always, kiddo. Always."